I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. The windows are frosting in their eternal battle with the cold outside. The Christmas tree has been knocked over by the cat. It's just about holiday season, Pat, and we have been gifted with some lovely fights to discuss on today's episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch, of course. With me here is Patrick Wyman, and today we will be discussing UFC 206, the card that was much maligned by hardcore fans, but which turned out to be one of the best of the year, especially once it got time for the main card. Just three spectacular fights, and, really nothing to complain about whatsoever. And then at the end of today's show, we're going to talk about just two fights, I believe, from next weekend's UFC on Fox card. The main event we will be discussing, Paige VanZant versus Michelle Waterson for some kind of meaning in the women's strawweight division. And then we will talk also about, what was the other one there? Sage Northcutt and Mickey Gall. That's right, of course, established UFC veteran Sage Northcutt and Mickey Gall. So that'll be at the end of the show. First, let's go with UFC 206.
Sage Northcutt and Mickey Gall both have more UFC fights than Michelle Waterson does. Just throwing that out there.
More UFC fights, maybe. Yes, that's true. But if we're going to talk about UFC 206, then we got to start with the main event. Let's talk about Max Holloway, Anthony Pettis. Most of us, I think, in the MMA analysis world or in the fight-picking world were predicting that Holloway would win here. I think a lot of people outside that world were predicting that as well. He's got the momentum. Pettis hasn't looked that great lately. You and I, Pat, were pretty convinced that Pettis would be really, really difficult to finish. And while he wasn't easy to finish, I for one, was shocked to see Max Holloway get him out of there without much trouble whatsoever, without really running into any of those kicks or getting hurt at any moment or kind of having to reassess. He kind of just patiently took Anthony Pettis apart.
Yeah, I on my first watch of this fight, I thought, you know what, Pettis didn't look that bad. He just wasn't on the level that Holloway was.
Yeah.
On the rewatch, I figured out some things that are more deeply troubling about Pettis's game. I mean, like, we have broken down in great depth over the last couple of years precisely what has gone wrong with Anthony Pettis's game. Mm-hmm. This fight convinced me of a new of yet another thing, and I think that's a basic inability to deal with opponents who cut angles. Like, that to me was the entire story of this fight, because Pettis had a lot of really good ideas about what he was going to do to Max Holloway and how he would adapt to Max Holloway. Like, he had to go southpaw a lot because he broke his right hand. Like, Pettis was doing a lot of trying to set up high kicks on breaks or trying to counter or trying to end exchanges with high kicks. None of them landed, or body kicks also, like trying to finish everything with a left kick. This was a really good idea, but none of them really landed all that cleanly. Why? Because Holloway refused to stand in front of him. Every time that Holloway finished his combination, Holloway was already cutting a new angle to get away from that left kick, and Pettis couldn't keep up with that. Pettis could not keep his feet moving long enough to land that kick cleanly.
Yeah.
That was a consistent issue in this fight, and it's like, man, so like a lot of those left kicks, even the ones that Pettis didn't land as cleanly as Pettis is used to landing them. So I don't know, like, that's a really basic problem, and I don't know how you solve that. Like, if Pettis can create an angle for himself, then he can do good things, but I just don't know that he knows how to adjust to an opponent who's going to do that to him. Because looking back on it, that was also the problem against Edson Barboza a lot. Yeah. Like, Barboza just kept moving, wouldn't stand in front of him.
He couldn't keep up. He suddenly started to look like a puncher who needed to really get his feet set, to knock his opponent's head off. He didn't look like this finesse kicker.
Yeah, so I guess now maybe that's kind of the root of Pettis's problems.
Well, I think you could perhaps tie that to the footwork thing that we have discussed. Pettis himself doesn't really have a great grasp of footwork. Maybe what we're learning now in the continuing saga of Anthony Pettis is that he kind of he does well when his opponent doesn't capitalize on his mistakes, even if he expects to capitalize on theirs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like getting pushed straight backward into the fence. That is what Pettis wants to do to his opponent, and that is what two of Pettis' last, now three in some ways, of his last four opponents that have beaten him have done to him. You know what I mean? He seems to be kind of vulnerable to the things that he wants to exploit and has never figured out that those vulnerabilities may be hurting him. In the same time, he's never expanded his understanding of how to make his tools work against someone who doesn't just make, foolish mistakes. It's almost like Anthony Pettis just kind of feels like he is stuck somewhere a few years back and can't change any of his ways of looking at combat sports.
Yeah, I mean, this really struck me because I remember very clearly rewatching the first fight with Benson Henderson a couple years ago and thinking, man, Pettis really does his best work when he can pressure, like when he can use his front kicks to force you backwards and force you to react to him. Yeah, exactly. That like this was really Pettis at his best. Watching Pettis try and fail to pressure Max Holloway was kind of an encapsulation of everything that's gone wrong, because it wasn't just that Pettis couldn't claim the initiative the way that he couldn't against Rafael dos Anjos or Eddie Alvarez when he was repeatedly forced to fight off the back foot. It was like, okay, this is Pettis trying to do what he wants to do, what he should be best at doing, and he just got lit up. Like there were sequences right at the start of the second round when Pettis really decided he was going to start to get aggressive. He was really going to go after Holloway, where he moves in. Every time Pettis moves into the pocket, Holloway would stick him with like a 3-punch combination and then immediately angle out. And Pettis looked like he had no idea how to deal with the angles and the lateral footwork that Holloway was giving him. Like there's a point where the quintessential one to me is Pettis walks into the pocket, tries to throw something. Holloway slips, hits him with a 3-punch combination, pivots, gets to the outside, and Holloway is literally behind Pettis in the middle of the cage before Pettis can turn to address him. Like that to me was just the quintessential moment that sums up everything that has gone wrong with Anthony Pettis' game.
Yeah, I'm watching it right now. It looks like Pettis expects to be able to work around his opponent or push them backwards at will, and expects that they won't try to work around him at all. He seems very, very flustered, I think, after about the first half of the second round in this fight. So after the knockdown, when Holloway knocked him down, I think is when Pettis really decided, like, okay, I've got to get after this guy, and then it became clear just how big the gap was. But that really impressed me, because I think I tweeted this live too, is that Max Holloway is winning every round against Anthony Pettis impressively. He's doing it while moving backwards. I expected him to really have to do a lot of pressuring, and he did it in spots here and there throughout the entire fight. But to fight off the back foot and allow Pettis that forward-moving range, like Edson Barboza did a lot, I think that is a true testament to the quality of your footwork. If Anthony Pettis may not be that viable as a top contender anymore, but I think he's still very useful for promoters and fight fans alike as sort of a barometer of current ability. How good is your footwork? How good is your control, your generalship, your distance management? If you can outstrike Anthony Pettis, it's a pretty good proof of those things. And now both Edson Barboza and Max Holloway have passed that test with flying colors.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at this point, it will be nice for Pettis to just become like a well-paid action fighter.
Sure, and not be expected to beat title contenders all the time.
Yeah, I mean, like throw him in there with Ross Pearson, or
let him fight Thiago Alves or something. You know what I mean? Give him 20% extra perks because Alves won't make weight, something like that. Just like give him a win in a fun striking battle.
Yeah, or have him fight Joe Lozon or Jim Miller or something like that. Like Pettis was put on this earth to head kick middling lightweights. And the fact that he managed to take those skills and make a run at the top of the division, and to do so in totally electric fashion, I think speaks to what an exceptional talent he is. But that looks to me more like, this looks to me more like a regression to the mean.
Yeah.
At this point.
Well, and who knows? Like throwing him to the wolves over and over, trial by fire to fix the problems he has. Clearly, that ain't working. So who knows? Maybe he could solve some of his problems if he was just given a chance to get his confidence back. and beat some fighters up again. I don't believe that he will, because that's kind of what he went through for the first part of his career, is just feeling like he could destroy anybody. But at least we'd have fun swaggering Anthony Pettis back. Put him in there. I think the highest... Oh, I do want to see this now that I thought of it. It's a contenders fight, but I kind of want to see Anthony Pettis versus Michael Johnson, Pat.
Why you want to watch Anthony Pettis lose again?
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I'm like, that sounds really fun, but I kind of know now that Michael Johnson's going to outbox him.
Yeah. I mean, I could stand to watch just like Pettis versus fringe top 15 guys for a while, because I actually don't think it's impossible for him to kind of make another run. I wouldn't bet on it, but I think if you look at the profile of guys who have made late career runs, I don't think Pettis is like entirely off the mark there. You take a guy who's an exceptional athlete, who has really been pretty durable in the sense that like when he gets in the cage, he's not a fragile dude. Like Pettis has been stopped by Max Holloway, and that's it, right?
Yeah, Max Holloway was the first.
And that was mostly body shots. That wasn't like he cracked Pettis' chin.
Yeah.
You know?
Although there is the other kind of durability to worry about too, because Pettis did break his hand. Of course, he's a guy who's had injuries throughout his career, been plagued by them, they might say. So there are worries that Pettis may look more 35 than 30 next year, you know?
Yeah, this is always a concern. But I think like if Pettis could go through a stretch where he stays healthy, like he did this year, like Pettis was basically healthy all year. This was his fourth fight in 2016.
Yeah, actually, that's something to celebrate.
Yeah, I mean, so if Pettis and frankly, I in some ways, I think that this version of Pettis did look better than the one who fought Eddie Alvarez earlier this year. I think that he had made some improvements. I think he's a better combination striker. I think he's better at setting up his kicks. I think his jab and his combination punching looked better.
He was circling better when
I
Holloway was coming forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you wanted to look for improvements, there have been some improvements. Were they all of the improvements that he needed to make? No, absolutely not. But if Pettis finds a trainer who can actually, like, I think on some level this is an argument against having the same trainer your whole career.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. Pettis can make small improvements with his coach, but it strikes you as the kind of the sort of mental block of problems. Like, he has a writer's block, fighter's block, I guess you could call it, and the solution is a total change of environment. You know what I mean? Like a full camp with a Dwayne Ludwig or a Firas Zahabi or a Brandon Gibson, or just someone who knows how to take somebody who is like a technical but aggressive striker and bring the best out of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, and I think that in some ways it's not just even that that Rufus has been his trainer his whole life. It's also that they have a really close personal relationship,
right? And
the word out of that, Jim, is that Rufus is not maybe as hard on Pettis as he should be. You know, like he's like his son. Yeah, that they really do have that kind of relationship. Like Pettis has been training under Rufus since he was a teenager.
Yeah,
like
he was his first star, and
I'm sorry,
he was kind of his first star fighter.
Yeah, I mean, these are guys who have known each other forever, and like it may just not even be possible for Rufus to be able to step outside himself to see what's actually going on there.
That strikes me as a possibility as well. So there are opportunities, really, is the point here for Anthony Pettis to make these dramatic changes going forward. But based on what we've seen so far, who knows? And Max Holloway once again passed that litmus test, proved that he is good enough to beat Anthony Pettis. Maybe it doesn't mean as much as it would have a couple of years ago, but sets him up in the fight with Jose Aldo. We are both very much looking forward to discussing that when the time for that bout rolls around, because I can't wait, Pat. I can't wait. It's one of those fights that I'm so excited to learn out the thing that will make me sad, because I'm a huge fan of both Max Holloway and obviously of Jose Aldo. So either way it goes, I'm not going to be that happy. But yeah, I those are the things that it's like a horror movie. I just can't wait to see the resolution. I'm hooked. So next up, let's talk about some of the rest of the action on the UFC.
Wait, real quick. We've got to take just a moment here to appreciate Max Holloway. We talked a lot about Anthony Pettis.
True.
Let's talk for just a moment here about Max Holloway.
I'm down.
We talked when we were doing our Styles Make Fight series about the elusive all-terrain fighter, about somebody who could really do just about everything they needed to in terms of moving between pressure and counters and sticking and moving and exchanging in the pocket. Somebody who could do all of that. I think Holloway is about as close as we've come to a true all-terrain striker.
You may be right.
At least. I mean, we're talking about he can pressure when he wants to. Like, look at some of the pressuring combinations he put together against Ricardo Lamas. Like, I've got a GIF of one of them that is a 15 strike combination that Holloway puts together with Lamas against the fence. He can stick and move the way that he did against Pettis when he pressured. Like, that was incredible. I mean, his timing, his footwork, his ability to let Pettis come to him, hit him with 3 punches, get out of the way immediately, and then maybe pressure, maybe you just let Pettis come back to you. Like, he can do that with equal facility. He can his head movement, I think, looked better than it ever had in this fight. Like, I think he looked real good in the pocket. He can play pure counterpuncher when he wants to. He can kind of play boxer puncher and box a bit in the middle of the cage, sometimes exchange, sometimes get aggressive. Like, I don't think there's anything that Holloway really can't do at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think maybe there are probably some workarounds that are difficult to notice, as there probably are for any fighter who tries to fight with another style. A lot of Holloway's pressuring is kind of just racking up the volume, but it's hard to take any credit away from that when he's so accurate and stays so balanced when he throws that volume, and doesn't totally turn into a pressure fighter to me, but definitely can swarm somebody back into the fence and has the distance management because he's such a great outfighter to keep them there on the end of his reach for a long period of time. It's pretty astounding to watch Holloway, like I said before, fight somebody like Pettis in basically 3 different modes throughout the fight. Where sometimes he's moving around and countering, sometimes he's coming forward, and sometimes he is just straight boxing with Pettis at long range and being very successful after about maybe a minute of adjustment for each type of fight, but being very successful in all of them.
Yeah, that's the key to me, is that he is successful in all of them. It's not just that he can do all of them, it's that he can win fights doing each of those. We have seen Pettis win fights with pressure.
Like the same fight, which I think is almost more impressive. It's not like we've seen Holloway come in and show a different wrinkle for different fights, where it's like, okay, we're going to need to do this against this guy. He comes into one fight and shows 3 different wrinkles.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, the ability to switch things up fluidly as need be, depending on like an adapting matchup over the course of the fight, like, that is really impressive. Yeah. Like, off the top of your head, Connor, I know it's the thought of either of these fighters losing depresses you. What's your real quick couple of sentences read on Aldo Holloway?
My gut, because of everything that's happened recently, is to pick Holloway. I think that volume, that flexibility, that could be crazy. But Holloway beating Pettis is a far, far cry from Holloway beating Aldo. The level of just technical perfection that Aldo brings to the table, knowing exactly which direction to move when the opponent comes forward. I think, for example, Holloway will never have had a harder time trying to pressure someone than he will if he tries to pressure Aldo. I think he will find that to be difficult. And if he does take that tack, which I kind of feel like if Aldo comes out and fights patiently and conserves his energy the way he so often has in the latter days of his career, then Holloway could end up in some trouble, being at kicking range, not quite being able to hit Aldo without being countered. But then Holloway, I kind of feel like I trust him more down the stretch. Even though we haven't seen him in 4th and 5th rounds, really, he showed no signs of slowing down in the 3rd round against Pettis, and usually tends to ratchet up the aggression and get more comfortable as the fight goes on. So, I don't know. It almost feels to me like it could be a total 30-27, or not a 30-27, like a split decision type of fight, where you have a lot of contentious disagreement about who won the first half, who won the second half, and what about that pivotal round that happened somewhere in the middle. The problem is I just don't know at this point that Jose Aldo can emphatically win a round strongly enough against Holloway to put his stamp on the fight, and I feel that Holloway probably can do that to Aldo. So I think I will pick Holloway by very close decision.
That sounds pretty reasonable.
That's my gut feeling at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to overstate. This is something that we've talked about a little bit with Aldo in the past, but like Aldo has had his biggest trouble has really failed to put his stamp on fights where he was giving up a substantial amount of size. Conor McGregor was the most recent one, but he didn't do a ton against Kenny Florian when they fought back in the day.
Yeah. I think that's one of his more beautiful fights because it was very artful the way he outmaneuvered Florian, but he really spent a lot of time figuring him out before he felt like he could let anything go.
Yeah, like it was clear that Aldo had some trouble with the range in that fight, and I think that Holloway could exploit that.
Yeah.
So I think I would take Holloway. But I think I think he's going to have to take a beating if he's going to do it. Like, I don't think that the way that he wanted to try and stick and move against Pettis, that seemed to be the mode in which he was most comfortable. I don't think that wins him a fight against Jose Aldo.
I don't think so either. I think he needs to pressure and come forward. But you know, it's really hard to evaluate because the reason I'm such a big fan of Jose Aldo is because he is a next level fighter. It is just a whole nother level of this perfect marriage of experience and athleticism and technical proficiency. That there's no one in the sport still who has all of those qualities in the combination that Aldo has them. And so, you know, going in there and saying, oh, I've fought somebody who can box from the outside, or I fought somebody who throws leg kicks, or I fought somebody who can defend takedowns. Like, no matter what you think you've experienced, you haven't experienced Jose Aldo doing it.
There's just no way to replicate Aldo's speed, depth of experience, and craft.
Yeah.
Like, there is no better defensive fighter in MMA history than Jose Aldo. Like, you try to hit him and you just can't. Like, it's amazing watching guys attempt to push the pace and push a volume disappear because they're eating counters, because they can't find the range that they want to find. Either he's too close or he's too far out. They can't find the rhythm that they want to find. Like, he does such a good job of disrupting their rhythm. He fights so much longer than he actually is with it because of his jab and because of his kicking game. And I think one thing we would have to bear in mind in this matchup is Aldo would not be afraid to kick. Like, Aldo beat Frankie Edgar with a jab and a straight right. Why? Because he really didn't want to give him kicks because he knew that Edgar excels at taking you down off of kicks. Against Max Holloway, I don't think he would have any compunction about throwing kicks.
Yeah, I doubt it.
So, or maybe Aldo is just at a stage of his career where he's afraid of breaking his foot and he thinks if I can just win a fight with a 1-2, like, why would I even bother to throw a low kick?
Yeah.
It's possible. That's also possible.
I'm kind of seeing it now, though. Like, Holloway, I would say defense is still maybe the weakest part of Holloway's game. He is clearly making some strides to improve it, and he has a lot of things to help cover up that flaw. You know, like volume and his footwork and you know, durability. He has things that help band-aid that a bit. But I can really see Holloway doing a lot of swinging and missing early and getting countered every time he takes a big miss, and having to kind of learn through negative reinforcement that he can't beat Jose Aldo trying to pot shot him. And and like you said, just kind of having to get beaten up first.
Yeah. So that's kind of my take on that fight is I think if Holloway is willing to get reckless and if he's willing to take that beating to get there, then I think he wins it, because I think it's hard to overstate how just freaking tough Holloway is.
Yeah.
Like, there is little doubt in my mind, as powerful a striker as Jose Aldo is, that barring like a flying knee, I think Holloway can take all those shots for 5 rounds.
Let's hope he has no kind of mystical shaman in his corner or anything, because if he does, he definitely took the toughness of Anthony Pettis in that last fight, and that will make him unstoppable.
Yeah.
Turning Pettis into a mortal and taking his chin for yourself is just next level game planning right there.
It's Hawaiian magic is what that is.
Okay, so let's take a break then. We've got Holloway covered. I could talk about Max Holloway all day, but I think given what he has done so far, we will have ample opportunity to continue discussing him in the near future. So with that being said, let's move on to the rest of the UFC 206 card quick break first. And when we come back, we're going to discuss Donald Cerrone versus Matt Brown, Cub Swanson versus Doo-Ha Choi, Fight of the Year candidate right there, as well as Kelvin Gastelum and maybe a bit more. Lando Venata, other things from UFC 206 and beyond. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, kicking off segment 2 with welterweights Donald Cerrone and Matt Brown. Fantastic fight, one of many fantastic fights on this main card in particular. What are your thoughts on it, Pat?
Man, poor timing to have this on the same night as Troy Swanson,
because
any other night this is a shoo-in for Fight of the Night.
Absolutely.
You know, this was a great fight. I thought it was interesting because we got to see some real improvements from Matt Brown. This was his second fight working with Duane Ludwig, right? Like he had been working with him for the Ellenberger fight too, but we didn't get to see a whole lot of that because he ate an enormous body kick right in the opening opening frame of the fight. But I think we really got to see some of the improvements that Brown had made. I thought his combination punching looked a lot better. He looked a lot better as a counter puncher. His footwork looked really good. He was every bit as imposing in the clinch as he usually is.
Yeah, he was not fully handcuffed to pressure. And that is the best possible thing I think you can say about Matt Brown. Because we have said for a long, long time on this show, many times, Matt Brown is the most defined pressure fighter in this division, if not the sport, where if he can't come forward, everything doesn't work. And that wasn't the case in this fight against a really solid striker. So I think that is actually quite a feather in the cap of Matt Brown and Duane Ludwig. And seeing the new amount, the new levels of untapped complexity that Matt Brown is capable of producing, the movement, the combinations, and just the overall diversity, and as a Cincinnatian and a diehard Matt Brown fan, it makes me really sad that this is only the second chance that Matt's had to work with Ludwig, and he's 35 and now on a 3-fight losing streak and probably not gonna make another run. And if he had gotten with Ludwig like 5 years ago, it could have been beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those situations where we just talked about this with Pettis, but let's let Matt Brown do Matt Brown things. Stop putting him in there with top 5 or top 8 or top 10 guys and let him be an action fighter. His run to the top was always kind of an anomaly that was based on specific stylistic matchups and some luck in getting through some of the tough fights that he got through. And so he was kind of overperforming his skill sets. So now we have a good sense for what he is. Matt Brown still has, I would say, at least 4 or 5 Fight of the Night type of performances in him if you match him up against his level of competition. If you put him in there with, I thought the Ellenberger fight was good matchmaking, but I think Cerrone is a top 5 welterweight. Yeah. You know?
I say Matt Brown, CR Bahadurzada. That's what I want to see.
Hell yeah. Make that fight. That is a perfect fight.
I think that's great. It'll be an action fight. Bahadurzada looked really good against Brandon Thatch. Zane Simon suggested that one on his Bloody Elbow article, and I like it. And I want to see Matt Brown just fight some guys who aren't super relevant, probably aren't going anywhere, but will have a Muay Thai kickboxing battle with him because I think he could actually even work his way back into a decent ranking with a few wins like that. Because I really think I saw glimmers of a new Matt Brown there. And all I wish for, Pat, is just a little more time to see that come to fruition. So Cerrone, of course, looked fantastic. Great boxing, really nice with his combination punching. Kicks were obviously fantastic, and as soon as he saw that the opening for the kick was there, he did not stop attacking it. He was very tenacious, very hard to put away, all these things we know about Cerrone. But Matt Brown was finally the guy, just to the point where I had kind of given up on saying, oh, these are the things that give Donald Cerrone trouble. Matt Brown, with a more diverse approach, was the guy to reveal that most of Cerrone's problems are, perhaps unsurprisingly, still there. That they've kind of been covered up a bit, band-aided a bit by his recent technical developments, but that the psychological underpinnings remain. And so when you pressure him with combinations, you still don't get a perfect reaction. He still has his mental limitations as a fighter.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to quote the great Taylor Swift, Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. Yeah, no, I mean, what Cerrone has done is impressive to the extent that it has managed to help him deal with a couple of really defined pressure fighters in his last few outings. He has dealt really admirably with guys who, on paper, are really, really difficult stylistic matchups for him. Like, there's no question to me that the version of Cerrone who lost to Rafael dos Anjos the second time would have lost to Matt Brown too. So that is a big step that Cerrone was able to deal with a guy who on paper is a bad stylistic matchup for him. That is a meaningful data point. At the same time, however, like, it showed us what the limits of that are, that like Cerrone is still going to kind of freeze a bit when guys really come after him hard, that if he gets into the pocket, he is a better counter puncher than he used to be. But he's still not a really comfortable guy when you're exchanging with him. That part of Cerrone's game exists to get guys to back off, not because he really wants to be in the pocket with you. That's an important distinction. Like, it's important to be able to do that, but at the same time, like, if you can force him into that kind of fight, as Brown showed, like, if you can throw combinations at him, you're probably gonna land and land clean.
Right.
So these are things to bear in mind. As kind of a segue to that, I was pretty convinced before Kelvin Gastelum fought him that Gastelum would have been the guy to beat him. And after watching what Gastelum did to Tim Kennedy, I am more convinced of that. Like, I really think that Gastelum presents the same kinds of issues, but he's probably not going to walk into a head kick. And or if he does walk into a head kick, he's got a ridiculous chin and can obviously take a shot. Like, that Gastelum is the kind of guy who could bury Cerrone in combinations in the pocket while pressuring him. And that strikes me as bad a matchup on paper as Matt Brown would have been. Gastelum is the worst case, the actual legitimate worst case.
Yeah. Well, why specifically? You just think that just the forward pressure and the volume will be too much for Cerrone?
Yeah. I mean, where Brown was still not real comfortable slinging combinations in the pocket, like, he managed to get them going after a little while. He does not have the kind of output that Gastelum does. Like,
Gastelum's very comfortable in the pocket.
Yeah, you know how many strikes Gastelum landed on Johnny Hendricks in a 3-round fight?
Was it like 120, something like that?
120, like 120, 124, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds
And he landed a ridiculous number on Tim Kennedy too. He will just stay in the pocket and chew you up with 2, 3, 4 punches at a time. Like that, I think, as much as the pressure is always going to be the thing that Cerrone struggles to deal with. Yeah. Like guys who are willing to hang in there with him and throw, who aren't going to be backed off.
He's always struggled with the pressuring fighters, guys who hang in the pocket and test him there. And I think he always will. It's just that his technical improvements have made it a little harder to get to that stage. You know, they've made it a little harder for people to fight the fight that beats Cerrone, but the same fight beats Cerrone. That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of summing it up. I mean,
like Rick Story didn't really end up pressuring. You know what I mean? Patrick Cote is not a great pressure fighter. Who else was there in there? Alex Oliveira. Not a fantastic technical grappler. These guys who could have used their size, strength, power to pressure Cerrone didn't really end up doing it because of the way Cerrone fought them. Matt Brown took what Cerrone was giving him and still fought a lot of that kind of fight and enjoyed a lot of success. So I think it does kind of say that if you're good enough, basically, to beat Donald Cerrone, you can still do it in a way that you thought you could beat him a couple years ago.
That's true. The keys to the game haven't changed. You know, if you run that Chiron out there before the fight, like it's still the same as it was. It's just Cerrone isn't going to give you as easy a time with it.
He's not going to give the keys to you.
Yeah. So that's kind of why. I mean, so Cerrone called out Damian Maia after that fight. How do you think that plays out, Connor?
I kind of think Maia beats him. I think if Maia pressures and comes forward and gets Cerrone down once, it's just that snowball of I'm fighting Damian Maia. He's got me on the ground. It only gets worse from here. Now it could be a Rory McDonald type situation. Cerrone is a solid wrestler, and I think in all things he gets better as the fight goes on. So I could see Cerrone having a pretty bad first round and stopping Maia in the third or the fifth if it were a longer fight, stopping him in the championship rounds. But it's a curious one, man. Definitely Cerrone has guts in this regard because who else is calling out Damian Maia? You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. Well, so purely from an enjoyment perspective, would you rather watch Cerrone try to contend? Would you rather watch him try and fight Damian Maia, or would you rather watch him do the action thing and fight guys like Jorge Masvidal?
I would rather watch Donald Cerrone fight Robbie Lawler. That is what I want to see.
Okay.
Option
that
C.
is fair. But leaving aside Robbie Lawler, because that's right there, the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Like, if you had to pick one of those tracks for him, do you think Cerrone contends, or do you think he's or do you think he's there to have fun?
I don't think Cerrone will ever be a champion in any division, and I think he doesn't really want to. You know, I think there's a part of him, an ambitious part of him that feels like he should, but Donald Cerrone has always looked profoundly unhappy in anything involving anything surrounding a title fight. You know what I mean? His worst performances have been in attempts to get number one contenderships or title shots. The pressure just gets to him. I think he's much better suited to being a really good action fighter who gets to fight all the time and doesn't really have to worry about the relevance and just goes in there and gets to enjoy figuring out tough but not too tough opponents. So I would rather see Donald Cerrone do the fun thing. I wouldn't mind seeing him make the attempt at the title, you know, but I think along the way at some point, whether it was at the title shot or just before, he would end up losing. And so, you know, I've seen it enough times that right now I really just want to enjoy Donald Cerrone's fights. But that's me. You know, I'm not Donald Cerrone. I can't make these decisions about a man's career and livelihood sitting in my chair. So, you know, I hope whatever he wants happens to him. But I get a sneaking suspicion that what he really wants is just to kind of fight 4 times a year and not be a champion.
Or 5 times. This was his 5th fight this year, I think.
There you go. Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah. I just think he wants to just keep being Donald Cerrone. And I'm happy with that. You know, I don't need Donald Cerrone to be a champion. I think he's enjoyable as the guy that he is. He fights all the damn time. He's really good at it. And, you know, you know Donald Cerrone. He's a familiar face to fight fans, so.
Yeah, I'm with that. I think it is important, I think, to take Donald Cerrone on his own terms rather than constantly wondering what's next for Donald Cerrone and like where does he go from here? Like just let the man do his thing.
Just every 3 months you're going to get a Donald Cerrone fight and stop complaining. You know, it's great. Yeah.
It is hard to overstate how valuable Donald Cerrone is to the UFC. If you're a promotion that wants to run 40 something events a year, if you can get Donald Cerrone on one out of every 4.5 events that you run, like, or one out of every 9.5 events that you run, you are very happy with that.
He's an instant shot in the arm of any event.
Yeah, like he adds, I mean, I would guess that Donald Cerrone added another 50,000 pay-per-view buys to this for them because he's a guy that people want to see and he's got a ton of name value and he's always out there. Like, props to Donald Cerrone, man. Like, I don't know that because a Donald Cerrone fight feels like a regular occurrence rather than an event, I don't know that we appreciate him as much as we should.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, he is Donald Cerrone is like the MMA fans because like he's not going for a title or whatever. We just really like his fights. He's like our reality TV. You know what I mean? And and like all we can say is like, oh, you know, well, it takes away jobs from writers. It's like, yeah, but the producers, man, they did a great job on this one. They really handled it well. Appreciate what you have. Donald Cerrone might be your popcorn entertainment, but goddamn, is it fun to eat popcorn and watch him do his thing.
You know what he is? He's a Marvel movie.
Sure, yeah, pretty solid. Mm-hmm. Kind of all the same once you actually look at them.
Donald Cerrone is the Iron Man 3 of
pretty good. A little too many robots at the end, but not bad.
You know, I say that about Donald Cerrone every time I see him.
Right, exactly. I'm like, why does every Donald Cerrone fight end with a beam of light shooting out of New York City and into the clouds? I'll never know. But that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
We should do a movie podcast, Pat.
I like that.
We just vaguely talk about big franchises that I've not been watching for several years. Featherweights. Let's talk about featherweights, Pat. Cub Swanson, Doo-Ha Choi. Fight of the Year candidate. It may be reevaluated. This has been an insane year, by the way, for Fight of the Year candidates. Condit Lawler was this year.
Yeah.
I forgot that. Like, that happened not that long ago. And then there was like Perry versus Roberts. Danny Roberts was an amazing fight. And then there was I don't know. There's been a lot. There's been many. I'm not thinking of all of them right now.
I think Diaz McGregor 1 and 2
of
for
course.
Christ's sake.
Both Diaz McGregor fights took place this year. It's been crazy. So I think in the near future, people may reevaluate their calls that this is fight of the year. I probably have already somewhat reevaluated mine, but to be in a position where you just can't stop yourself from saying that this is absolutely the greatest fight of all time is a good position to be in. You know, to be in that intoxicated by a contest. And this was that kind of contest. Seeing this live was just mind-blowing. And we could talk all day about just how exciting and back and forth and everything it was. And we could certainly also take the tack of talking mostly about Doo Ho Choi, which is what a lot of MMA fans I've seen have done, talking about how, oh, this doesn't destroy his hype. It actually makes him look pretty good. He can make these adjustments and go forward. It was really fun, and that's a good thing for him in the end. I kind of want to talk about Cub Swanson. And it seems strange that I feel like I'm fighting against the current to talk about what the winner of a fight did to win the fight. But most people are not talking about it. And I want to talk about the veteran savvy of Cub Swanson that led him to victory here. And also the backup that he really needed from Greg Jackson in the corner.
So real quick, we have to preface this by noting a friend of the show, Leg Kick TKO on Twitter, who was doing fantastic work with the vines of Greg Jackson in the corner, screaming things and verbally yelling at the other cornermen who were distracting Cub from the task at hand.
Yeah,
like it was A+ corner work. Also hilarious to hear Greg Jackson say, "Stop saying that" to the other people.
God damn it! Yeah. Greg Jackson being like a really angry Muppet with swears. It was great because I think this is it's not what you may think it is kind of fight, where Greg Jackson sort of losing his shit and getting angry and frustrated, that's not what you think it is. He may be this zen, thoughtful, philosophical guy, but when he gets worked up in the corner, it is typically because it makes sense to do so. It's rational. And Cub Swanson, you know, if you think about a savvy veteran performance, you often think about like what John McDessie started to do to Lando Venata, picking someone apart, sort of making them miss, trying to get in their head because they're inexperienced. Cub Swanson coming forward like an absolute madman, that's veteran savvy too. Knowing how and when to do that is veteran savvy. And so I think this was like a different take on how dangerous it can be to fight someone with the level of experience and craft that Cub Swanson has, because even if he's not doing things that are really pretty and like pointing out to you like, look how much better my technique is than yours, he can still outsmart you to win the fight. I don't think there was any question in this fight that Doo Ho Choi looked like the more technical striker. Like straight punches, timing, combinations was all pretty, you know, even a little bit of head movement, some pretty good pressure footwork, some feinting. Cub Swanson was not the most technical man in the cage, but he was the better fighter because of the decisions he made.
What Jackson and Swanson picked up on was that Choi is a come forward fighter. Like, he's a really good counter puncher. I think we discovered that there's a lot more depth to Choi's counter game than we had given him credit for going into this fight. Like, because I remember we talked about this last week, and Connor, you mentioned that you thought that Choi might be kind of a one-note counter puncher. Because we just hadn't seen all that much from him because his fights had been so short. Like, we didn't know how much actual depth, how many layers there were to that game. I think that answered this question. We know that he has a lot of different tools that he can use as an aggressive counter puncher. But the key word there is aggressive. When Swanson got after him, Choi did not have a lot of answers for him. Yeah. That to me was the big turning point here. And that speaks to your point about adjustments. I think it was probably the plan to pressure going in. But Cub Swanson is not really a pressure fighter. That's not really his jam. He is, I think, a quintessential boxer puncher. Yeah.
He didn't look that good pressuring. He got really wild. He was like really hittable, everything. But Greg Jackson and Cub both knew probably more on a mental level from Greg Jackson, but Cub was in there doing his job as a fighter. He was listening to his coach and keeping calm and making the adjustments. They knew that it didn't have to be pretty, that risk of being open and being predictable, or, telegraphing, that risk was wise to take that risk, knowing what the reward could be, knowing that you would
it was an acceptable risk.
Yes.
Like this is why, in the context of fighting, like a risk averse strategy is not necessarily the one that is the least risky in the context of the fight.
Yeah, if you're always worried about the one punch that may hit you now, and you don't get hit by that one punch, what's to say that doesn't set you up for the 10 punches that are coming down the road? You've got to think, if you're thinking strategically, which we know Greg Jackson does brilliantly, better than almost anyone else in the game, then you have to know where the calculated risks are and when to take them and when to leave them in order to make the whole fight work to your advantage.
Exactly. This was like, this is kind of an unrelated example, but it's the quintessential one to me, is in miscalculating these odds, is George St. Pierre versus Jake Shields.
Okay.
Where I think they were so concerned about not putting themselves in position to risk a flash sub that it put them in position to get lightly tapped and kickboxed by Jake Shields, and where they were actually in risk of losing the fight because some of those rounds were way closer than they had any business being.
Right.
So rather than GSP trusting his top game and just blast doubling Jake Shields and beating the shit out of him from the top, which is probably what would have happened had they gone that route, they ended up in a shitty kickboxing match with Jake Shields where there was much more risk of losing the fight, I think, than there would have been from the small chance of Jake Shields locking up a guillotine on a double leg,
Sure, yeah.
So that's but so to the point with this fight, also, this is also a Greg Jackson corner. I think that Greg Jackson has learned things like that over the years.
Oh, I think that Jackson Winklejohn in general has shown definite improvement. Like we worried a few years ago, maybe around 2012, that maybe they were getting passed up by the times, and they're not. They are keeping with the times. They are still at the forefront. They have made a few changes to coaching, and I think that Greg Jackson is still learning as a cornerman the different approach. We see a lot more variety in how Greg Jackson deals with his fighters than we ever used to, 5-10 years ago. He has more and more individualized his approach. Do you know why he tells jokes to Cub Swanson between rounds? Do you think it's to like calm Cub down and check his mental state to see if he's thinking clearly?
I would imagine so. Yeah, I'll ask him about that. I'm going to Albuquerque for Christmas.
Look at you.
Yeah, so hopefully
Albuquerque for Christmas. What's in Albuquerque at Christmas time?
My wife's family.
Oh, okay. Visiting family. All right, that makes sense. I'm like, Pat, are you one of these people who goes somewhere warm during Christmas? Because everybody knows the only way to enjoy Christmas is to be really uncomfortable and cold.
Yeah, well, dude, Albuquerque is not warm at Christmas, man. It's gonna be in the 40s.
Is there anything nice about Albuquerque?
There's lots of things nice about Albuquerque.
Too
man.
hot, too cold, no vegetation. Meth.
All of that is a lie. All of that is incorrect.
Except for the meth.
No, I actually really like Albuquerque. I think the food is amazing. I really like my in-laws. They're wonderful people. And they all like each other, which is a weird experience for me as somebody whose family does not care for each other.
It's not the Tallahassee of the Southwest, is what you're saying.
No.
Okay. All right. Okay.
No. But so hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to Greg and Brandon Gibson while I'm there, and maybe I can ask them about some of this.
He said to Cub, but after the first round, he said, "What did the fish say when he ran into the wall?" And Cub, with no humor, he was like, "Oh damn." He's like, "Hey, you're on tonight. All right." He can't fight moving backwards. Get out there, Cubby. For some reason, they just had this little figure out what the punchline to my joke is, and they do that a lot. So, but I think maybe that was to keep Cub focused on planning and doing things logically, because we know that Cub is an inconsistent fighter, and I think it's because he's an emotional fighter. He likes to put on a show. He likes to go out there and swing, and that's why Jackson was getting so frustrated with the other cornermen at one point, because they were urging Cub so hard to finish Choi, and I think the moment Greg Jackson saw that Choi was tough, the moment he saw that the shots that would put other people away weren't going to put him away, that this wasn't Charles Oliveira, he knew that his fellow coaches had to stop screaming at Cub to go and finish him. He said, he's getting wild, and they said, he's going to knock him out. And Jackson actually says in the corner audio, but he could knock Cub out literally just before Choi lands a cracking left hand on the temple. And that's when Greg Jackson starts getting really frustrated and screaming, "God damn it," because Cub almost gets knocked out. And so having that head in the corner is just an unmatched sort of advantage.
Yeah, that's because, like, I kind of wonder about this, but, like, I know over the last few years, Jackson has gotten more into, like, game theory and things like that. So I would imagine, like, there is a literal calculus playing out in Greg Jackson's head where he is in live time weighing the odds of things like this.
Yeah.
As the fight goes on.
He's like, all right, 5 seconds of flurrying. It's starting to get too risky to continue swinging at him now. We're going to try and back off. If Greg Jackson could control his fighters as if it was Robot Wars, boy, would it be great.
Yeah. Well, he's got really he's got a lot of thoughts about these things. Like, he has thought about this because I remember talking to him about, the last guy that we were gonna discuss in this segment, Lando Venata, about why Venata gassed. And he said it wasn't because he thought Venata was out of shape. It wasn't even because he turned up the volume. It was because he let himself get emotional in that space. And I think the same deal with Cub in exchanges. It's not that Cub is destined to lose those exchanges, that they inherently become more risky, but they risk letting Cub get too emotional.
Well, and his gas tank, too. I thought Cub was going to be done after round 2.
Yeah.
But Greg Jackson gave him focus and calmed him down emotionally, and he finished the fight really strong. I thought he was gassed, so there's probably some truth to that.
Yeah, that is why that is the key in Jackson's mind to cardio. It's not like the physical training. You can do the physical training, but it's being able to control your emotional responses.
I knew a boxing trainer who once said that running was not actually great for boxing for physical preparation, because running is not the kind of cardiovascular endurance you need for a boxing match, but that running is really good for mental preparation, because you need to be able to, like, be alone with yourself and be uncomfortable and push through when you start to get that sort of long distance sort of tiredness. And mentally, that is what tiredness can feel like in a prize fight, is like running 10 miles and knowing that you have another 10 miles to go. And that accompanying yourself with that, or adjusting yourself to that feeling, is the most valuable thing about conditioning for a fight.
Yeah, this is true. So real quick, what did you think of Venata?
Okay. Not as great as maybe I'd hoped. But John Makdessi showed up, so that there's something to that. I think John Makdessi was actually pretty clearly winning the round up until the point when he got knocked out. Not that there was a lot of round to go by, and not that he was winning it really emphatically. He didn't do any damage, really. But he was landing his jab. He was out-angling Venata a little bit. Venata seemed to come in wanting to be flashy. That's kind of what I felt from this fight. Like, he wanted to have a good sophomore effort on the back of his last fight. And fortunately for him, he got an amazing knockout, one that will be replayed over and over and over for years to come. Just a stunning wheel kick to the jaw, beautiful little flowy sort of setup. That was all nice. Everything else, though, was not so flowy to me. And maybe Venata, because he wanted to go in there and put on a show, he needed a little time to warm up. But I know him mostly as the guy who goes out there and flows from minute one and gets early stoppages and puts on a great fast-paced show. And here he looked a little flummoxed by someone who was really just boxing him, who was just working a jab and angling and controlling a distance. And it's almost more telling because almost more worrying that happened against Makdessi and not Ferguson, because while their styles are very different, Makdessi is really small. He shouldn't be the guy you face when you've almost stopped Tony Ferguson that outboxes you from distance, because his arms are real short.
I've got a couple of counterpoints to this.
Okay.
First, Makdessi more than the boxing. I thought Makdessi looked real good, first of all. I thought this was the best Makdessi has looked from the opening bell in quite some time. The jab looked fantastic, but we've always known Makdessi's jab is fantastic. What was surprising, I think, was how good Makdessi's counters were. He looked really sharp with the counter right and the counter left hook early on, much sharper than we have seen him in the past. So that's point number one. Point number two, though, is the fight lasted 90 seconds. Like, I think it's possible that Venata would have adjusted a little bit, but we will never know because he kicked his goddamn head off.
Yeah.
90 seconds into
Like
the
the
fight.
only inkling that he may have been making an adjustment is that he kicked his head off.
Yeah, like I think there's not a lot. I don't think we should draw a lot from a 90-second fight. The example that I will use is Phil Davis versus Wagner Prado, a fight that happened a few years ago where Prado got his eye poked out after looking real good for about the first minute and a half of that fight. And a lot of people went into the rematch and picked Prado on the basis of having looked good.
I think I picked Prado. In fairness, I think I had just started writing about MMA, but I think I picked Prado to beat Phil Davis, which is madness.
Yeah, so let's bear in mind that 90 seconds does not tell the whole story of a fight.
Yeah.
So
small sample size.
I mean, all I know is I'm excited to see Lando Venata go out there and face somebody who's not John Makdessi.
Yeah, I won't say anything concrete about it, and because I think that would be irresponsible. But personally, I will be watching Venata now closely, sort of wondering if that presages a bigger problem. If maybe he gets inside his own head too much, if maybe he's too committed to being flashy and struggles with fundamentals. But I can't say that he does.
I thought his fundamentals looked fine. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. I thought he was getting outboxed by a better boxer, and he adjusted by deciding that he was going to not box.
I mean fundamentals in terms of tactics, like going against a guy who's keeping on the end of his jab. I wouldn't exactly think of as a darting lead right as the main tactic to use against that guy, and it was basically all Venata did for the first minute.
He did it twice because the fight lasted for 90 seconds.
He did it about 4 times, if I recall correctly. He kept going for that dart right and didn't land it once. But again, like I'm saying this, I don't even want to defend this because it's not a real critique. I don't know until I see more of Venata. So I agree with you. A minute and a half, a minute and 40 seconds, not enough time to really draw from it. Maybe Venata was having a little trouble adjusting, or maybe if we'd seen 3 more minutes of that fight, it wouldn't have even looked like he'd had to adjust. It wouldn't have stood out as much as it does seem to now. So, Great knockout. Promising performance. I have my questions, but none of them are really, they're all suspicions more than anything. They're not hypotheses just yet. So we'll have to see more from Lando Venata. And frankly, I'm not upset about that because that was real good to see. Although poor John Makdessi, he just can't catch a goddamn break. But what's that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wonder if he got his jaw broken again.
That would suck, man. Poor Makdessi. He seems so nice. He seems like such a cool guy.
Depends on who you ask. Who he didn't pay when he was sponsoring fighters with his Fear the Fighter brand. They may not be such big fans of John Makdessi.
Well, fuck you, John Makdessi. All right. I hope you got your jaw broken. Okay, I'm not going to go that far to the other side. Harsh. I really flipped there. Let's take a break of our own. When we come back, couple things to discuss from UFC on Fox, VanZant versus Waterson, and then we will be out of here after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. UFC on Fox, the main event of this one, Pat. Women's strawweight battle between Paige VanZant and Michelle Waterson. Both women, I think, with a lot of potential to be sort of fan favorites. Obviously, both very attractive ladies, both athletic, both dynamic, both have a few finishes, but are just more or less exciting in back-and-forth fights all the time. Neither of them, I think, are really... They don't look that great to me as someone who's looking at this division looking for title contenders. I worry that at Team Alpha Male, Paige VanZant will never get there. Michelle Waterson, I think, she's a female Cub Swanson. She's got a few too many holes in her game, I think, to be reliable. But in a matchup against each other, I think it's the perfect way to use 2 fighters like this. I think there is no better way to match Paige VanZant than with Michelle Waterson right now, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. I fundamentally agree with that. I think Well, the key to me at this point is that they're both offensive fighters, and that I think is why they will never be kind of the elite in this division. They're both Waterson more so than VanZant. The Waterson is much closer to being the fighter that she will become than VanZant is. But like Waterson does not have great takedown defense, does not have great striking defense, relies almost entirely on range and angles to avoid her opponent's shots. Doesn't have the best gas tank in the world. I think she slows down a little bit as the fight goes on. But my God, she is super fast. She's super athletic. She is surprisingly physical for somebody who isn't like a huge fighter. She has real power in her shots. Like,
yeah,
she is just. I think the Cub Swanson comparison is a really good one. Like Swanson with not as good a hands and a much more dynamic kicking game.
Sure.
Who wants to play kind of a similar kind of game. Range striking more or less in the middle of the cage with a lot of flashy, unorthodox stuff.
Yeah.
And also, both she and Swanson really love that hip toss in the clinch.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So that's a good comparison. I hadn't thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. VanZant, like skill-wise, she is still raw. I feel like we've been saying that about VanZant for quite a while now. She is improving. She's getting better at some things. But God, she's a bad defensive fighter. Like a genuinely bad defensive fighter.
You know what my fear is, Pat? I think she might be improving in the wrong ways.
Explain.
Well, Paige VanZant, good aggressive fighter, strikes me as, she did say, I'm watching her fights, she apparently told, I think it was Brian Stan a while back, maybe it was Mike Goldberg, that she was a swarmer now. When she got more comfortable, she might not be, but right now she wanted to go in there and start the action right away. Maybe that gives me the false impression that that's what she's best suited to, but overwhelming people is something she does really well. You know, that is the one thing I've seen from her where she has gone into fights where it looks like maybe she's not winning it, and she ends up winning it because she can overwhelm people. She's very physically strong. You've talked in the past about seeing her sort of overpowering some men her size in the gym. She's very powerful. She's, not a huge hitter, but definitely physical strength and aggression are boons for her. And in her last fight, she kind of lost a first round boxing with Beck Rawlings entirely from distance. And I'm not sure that if we hadn't seen that kick that we wouldn't be talking about VanZant winning the third round but losing the fight.
Yeah, this is one of those things because I'm with you on all of that. I don't think it's so much that VanZant is like physically that strong. It's just that she sucks you into this kind of fight,
just tenacity.
Where, you tire yourself out really fast, and that was what I saw when I was watching her with male flyweights and bantamweights going in the gym. Was she would get kind of tossed around for about the first minute of these exchanges, but she would just keep going and keep going and keep going. So by the third, fourth, fifth minute of these rounds, like these dudes were just exhausted, and she was shoving them up against the wall, like grinding her forehead into their chins and just kneeing the shit out of them.
Yeah.
Like over and over and over again, she would do this.
So Paige VanZant with this constant onslaught, that strikes me as the best version of Paige VanZant.
Yeah, she is what she should be working on is becoming a better pressure fighter who doesn't get hit so much as she comes in, not like an outboxer. Because it seemed fairly clear to me that is like not her jam.
It strikes me as a very casual way of thinking about how styles work in combat sports. Mm-hmm. Where like so at the Team Alpha Male gym, or maybe it's just Paige, but you have this idea in your head like, oh, brawling, fighting aggressively and throwing a lot of punches, that's what you do when you're not good. But when you get better, you become this defensive outfighter. It's like when you go into a gym and you're like, well, we'll teach you to defend with the really high guard now. When you get better, you can start working slips and shoulder rolls and parries and whatever. And to me, that has always not made sense, because you should be trying to fight to your style or fight to discover your style. And very few fighters that I know of went from being a crazy bruiser to being an outfighter over the course of their career. Like either they were a bad outfighter when they started, or they were a bad bruiser, and they became better versions of those things. Over time, they'll develop enough technical know-how that they'll be like a boxer puncher or something, if they were a really aggressive fighter to start. But almost never have I seen someone make such a diametrically huge jump from one style to the other. And VanZant is attempting to do that, if her last fight is any indication. And so that's my worry, because I am ready to pick Paige VanZant here over Michelle Waterson if she fights the way she used to. And if she fights the way she fought against Rawlings, I think she really might lose.
Yeah. I could see her. I mean, I'm picking Waterson in this fight. Like, the X factors here to me are, what does Waterson look like after a year and a half on the shelf and after suffering a major knee injury, and how has VanZant managed to improve since her last fight out? But if the versions of the fighters that we end up seeing in the cage on Saturday are more or less the same versions that we saw the last time out, with a few tweaks here and there, I think Waterson just punishes VanZant. Waterson is a good counterpuncher. She has really fast hands. She can match the kind of physicality that VanZant brings to the table. But she's just better. She's just way more polished. And I don't think she's going to get sucked into the kind of fight that VanZant prefers. And on the mat, too, like, Waterson is a great scrambler. That's exactly what VanZant does well. I could see VanZant kind of outworking her in those exchanges if there are a lot of them. But I don't know that without pressuring, I don't think that VanZant can force those kinds of exchanges, you know?
Yeah, they are. I said in my Sherdog preview that they both grapple like blue belts, which means there is a lot of aggression, but also a lot of opportunities to counter that aggression. A lot of jumping on every opportunity you get, because you know how many opportunities there are. You know what I mean? The blue belt is like the. What's the quote about? The Bruce Lee's progression as a martial artist. Like, when I thought it was a kick was just a kick. Then I learned that a kick was so much more than a kick. And then I learned that a kick was just a kick again. They're in the kick is more than a kick phase of grappling right now, where everything is just amazing. And there seems to be all these possibilities for what they can do on the ground, and they have no discipline. They don't have that they can't reduce that back to something really consistently effective yet. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm going to pick VanZant because I think Waterson, being a former atomweight who does kind of gas, Waterson not having takedown defense or really defense of any kind as a strong point in her arsenal, that is so vulnerable to what VanZant used to do that I'm not yet ready to let go of the idea that VanZant can still fight the way she... It's only been one fight, you know what I mean? That she hasn't fought that way. Mm-hmm. So I'm still holding on hope that VanZant will look at this opponent and take the obvious conclusion, which seems really obvious to me, that you pressure the hell out of Michelle Waterson, you expect to lose the first round, and you wear her down over the course of the fight. But if she doesn't do that, I'm with you. I think Waterson will beat her. So yeah.
I mean, I think even if she does pressure, she's going to get her face absolutely messed up.
I think she will walk in. I don't think Waterson's quite as good as Namajunas. Like, I don't think she has the strategic trapping to back up what she tries to do on the feet, but she's accurate and she's pretty powerful. And so
really, because I think she's a much better combination striker and a better pure counterpuncher than Namajunas.
Sure, yeah, like timing and stuff like that are great. I'm talking about using those little pauses to move and create angles, like how to make this the fight you're fighting for 3 rounds straight. I don't think Waterson does that very well. She gets backed up. I think she gets backed up in straight lines too easily. I think when she throws combinations, she jumps into the clinch too often. I think she doesn't have enough foundation to her game to allow her to do only what she really wants to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think I think it gets spotty sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I don't disagree that she's not like she's not Max Holloway with her
sure,
footwork,
yeah.
You know? But I think she's closer to Max Holloway than Anthony Pettis, if that makes sense. To go off the
she's more Max Holloway than she is Pettis.
Yeah, I think that she does it often enough. Like yes, there are still times when she gets backed up in straight lines, she gets put on the fence. But I don't think it's a bad thing that she dives into the clinch. She's a really good clinch fighter.
Yeah, I struggle to see that
more technical clinch fighter than VanZant is at this point, I think.
Yeah, I struggle to see that working against VanZant. If she's going to put herself in the clinch, then she could save VanZant from making a bad fight decision. Because I think
that's a strategic. That would be a tactical win for Waterson as she pulverizes VanZant's body in the first 3 minutes with knees, and a poor strategic decision because that's how VanZant wins the fight. Right?
I agree. Yeah.
So, I don't know, but I mean, I think judicious clinching and landing a few shots is not a bad idea for Waterson to
Yeah.
embrace. Like, I don't think she needs to avoid the clinch like the plague here.
No. Yeah, VanZant is not Ronda Rousey. And if you can, like if you can, being able to step in and wrestle for a bit at will is really helpful for an outfighter. I just haven't seen her I do it judiciously enough that I'm confident she can do it for 3 rounds without, like, at some point getting sucked in, like the way Nama Yunus did against Kovalkiewicz, at some point. But who knows? It's actually a pretty interesting fight, especially now that we've talked about it. It's actually pretty interesting, so I'm looking forward to that. But the one that we really wanted to talk about here, from kind of a weird angle, is the welterweight co-main event, Sage Northcutt versus Mickey Gall. May I be the first to say, Pat, that we know it's possible that we know nothing about Mickey Gall. That is how I want to lead off this discussion, because I have seen a lot of people really confidently picking Mickey Gall over Sage Northcutt. And while we've seen some things from him that are very promising, the level of opposition against which we have seen those things means that they may vanish like a puff of smoke in the face of adversity. Because beating a debuting fighter who has done nothing since, beating Mike Jackson, who was kind of a debuting fighter, he may have had some weird fights and some kickboxing matches and stuff here and there, but was essentially a debuting fighter who has also done nothing since. And then beating CM Punk, who's an old debuting fighter, so kind of the worst one of those 3. Those are 3 essentially meaningless wins. They're good experience. They build a guy's confidence. They look impressive, but the level of competition means nothing. And I think that it's far too soon to say that on the basis of those wins, Mickey Gall can beat Sage Northcutt.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at with here. Like, because I've noticed the same thing. I've noticed a lot of people who are like, well, Northcutt can't grapple. Mickey Gall's a legit grappler. Like, first of all, no, Sage Northcutt can grapple. He got, like, is he the world's best grappler? No, he's absolutely not. But to say he can't grapple is a pretty weird misreading of what we've seen from him. Like, it's not like if this goes to the ground, Northcutt is getting insta-subbed. You know what I mean? Like, what we have seen is Mickey Gall out-grappling CM Punk, a guy with 0 experience, Mike Jackson, a guy who if you talk to Mike Jackson about his combat sports experience, it is not big on the grappling, and a debuting fighter. That's Mickey Gall's experience, and like those are good fights to have. But if I were evaluating Mickey Gall as a 3-0 prospect, for inclusion on a list that I was working on, I would say I will not put him on a list until I see him fight somebody
right.
who,
yeah,
like, because you see guys like this all the time, like fighting on the Brazilian scene or the Russian scene, who have beaten like 3 dudes like this, and it doesn't mean anything. Like,
yeah, let's put it this way. This is the point at which you should start considering whether or not to give Mickey Gall the fight that will allow you to decide if he can fight Sage Northcutt. Like, this isn't the time at which you say he's ready to beat Sage Northcutt.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not going to confidently say, like, oh yeah, Northcutt is going to blow his doors off. But it's also nuts to think that we have any real idea of the extent of Mickey Gall's game. Yeah. We haven't seen Mickey Gall box for longer than about 45 seconds, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it is not, I do want to emphasize, it is not that Mickey Gall can't beat Sage Northcutt. In fact, I think it's quite likely. Sage Northcutt is not a great grappler. Sage Northcutt maybe does have some issues with kind of getting emotional or frustrated, running out of ideas over the course of the fight. All these things. Problem is that we have seen Sage Northcutt test these things and now recently overcome them against reputable, if not amazing, competition. We have not seen Mickey Gall fight a single reputable opponent, not even close to being reputable. And so it's not that Mickey Gall can't do these things. It's just that there is as of yet no reason to expect that he will do these things against a fighter the quality of Sage Northcutt. And Sage Northcutt is a quality fighter. That has been lost too much. That Sage Northcutt is suddenly no longer an amazing athlete or a really accurate striker with great natural timing, that he's not powerful, or a natural transitional fighter, that he's not really good in quick scrambles. He has all these things that he had at the start of his career. He's just now finding his feet and trying to figure out what the foundation that for those things needs to be, or how to expand the network of his techniques. And I think he's doing it,
A lot of prospects lose fights. A lot of prospects lose bad fights.
Yeah.
A lot of guys who have gone on to be really, really good have lost fights in worse fashions than Sage Northcutt lost to Brian Barberina.
Sure, yeah.
Is all I'll say about that. And we've talked about this a fair bit, but I think it bears paying attention to, just how fast people are to turn on a guy, or to write somebody off. And you know what? There were people who wrote Max Holloway off after getting armbarred by Dustin Poirier. There were people who wrote Max Holloway off after losing 2 in a row to Dennis Bermudez and Conor McGregor, who were like, this dude, okay, fine, he's just an action fighter. The point isn't that a fighter is destined to be great or a fighter is destined to be nothing. The point is that we don't know.
Yeah.
That when you have a guy who's, what is Northcutt now, 20, 21? He's been fighting as a pro for 2.5 years. You have no idea what that guy is going to end up being. And when you're looking at Mickey Gall, you're talking about a guy who isn't going to hit his prime as a fighter for 6 years. You have no idea what that guy is going to end up looking like by the time that rolls around.
Often it's the fights that really make you question that prospect that allow them to become the one you expected them to be in the first place. A lot of prospects need those losses. And I would say it's no different for Sage Northcutt. Needs losses. And then he almost perhaps needs to come back in his fight after his first loss and not win it as comfortably as he wanted to. He needs to come back and almost lose and be like, all right, it wasn't a fluke. I need to actually work hard to get these wins. What am I going to do? What changes am I going to make? Mickey Gall has not had any of those experiences. This will probably be one of those experiences for Mickey Gall. I think that's a far likelier outcome than saying that Gall is going to immediately take down and work Sage Northcutt on the ground. So it is what it is. Can't call it concretely, but that's the point we're trying to make. Don't call it concretely until you've seen it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I think that just about does it for our show. Before we wrap up, Pat, what do you have coming out this week?
Well, I got a few things coming out this week.
Of course you do.
First of all, I will have a complete guide to this UFC on Fox card. Fun card, top to bottom. I think I doubt you will leave this event thinking that you wasted your time. That's first and foremost. Second, I will have a new episode by the time this episode is out. New episode of The Fall of Rome, looking at Attila and the Huns. Let's talk about step empires, huh? Let's see, what else am I doing?
That's what the kids are talking about these days.
Yeah, all the cool kids are talking about mounted archery, Connor.
Please say the words Parthian shot, Pat. I need to hear it.
I'll be saying the words Parthian shot. So that's another thing. What else am I doing? Jesus. I don't know. I'll probably do kind of a thing on VanZant, maybe a thing on Northcutt Gall. I don't know. But I will have one or two other things out for Bleacher Report later in the week, but I'm kind of slammed. I don't know what those are going to be. What are you up to?
Well, this week, of course, Sherdog preview of VanZant versus Waterson. That should be going up at some point soon. Andre Ward video is nearing completion. The Ward Kovalev breakdown. I should call it a Kovalev video as much as it is a Ward video, because I'm not trying to make too much of a case as to who deserved to win. And what else? There was one other thing. Oh, I want to write a piece about Cub Swanson. I want to write a piece about a different sort of veteran savvy. I'm thinking of, how about this, Pat? I think I want to call it Brawling with Brilliance, because then not only does it give the impression that he's brilliantly brawling, but perhaps that he could be brilliant, but he's struggling with it. How about that?
I like it.
Oh, you have to say that. We're being recorded right now. But
I do have to say that. No, I actually like the approach, though.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So that's it for me this week. I believe maybe something different. Who knows? Half the stuff I say I'm going to do, I don't do. And then I do a bunch of stuff that I never mention on the show. So who knows? It's just a wild, wild world out there for me. But that is our episode of Heavy Hands. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. If you didn't get a chance to watch UFC 206, go back and watch it, and then re-listen to this episode all over again, because that event was absolutely satisfying. And as we look forward to UFC on Fox, please know that there will be a bonus episode either this week or next week. We're thinking this week, Pat. There will be a bonus episode.
This week.
Bonus
this week
episode.
We'll have a bonus episode
of Heavy Hands for $3 patrons. $3 patrons get access to 2 or more bonus episodes every month from now on. That's the plan. And thank you to all of you who have already jumped on board. And if you haven't, come on in here. You will get access to the bonus episode we already did, and then the new one coming out this week. And for every month from here on out, 2 bonus episodes every single month. So look forward to that. We will be talking about up-and-coming sort of prospects in divisions that seem to be completely lacking prospects. So we're going to be talking like heavyweight, women's bantamweight, flyweight, and more on that bonus episode this week, and maybe keying you into some fighters you didn't know about that you should be watching more closely. But that does it for this episode. Thank you for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.